In this case, the unintended consequence of Mr. Garner's death must have a consequence of its own. Therefore, I agree with the Deputy Commissioner of Trials' legal findings and recommendations. It is clear that Daniel Pantaleo can no longer effectively serve as a New York City police officer. There are absolutely no victors here today. Not the Garner family, not the community at large, and certainly not the courageous men and women of the police department who put their own lives on the line every single day in service and to the people of this great city.
That was NYPD Commissioner O'Neill saying that Daniel Pantaleo, the New York City police officer whose chokehold was partly to blame for Eric Garner's death in police custody in 2014, has been fired from the NYPD, ending a 5-year legal battle over the circumstances surrounding Garner's death, which sparked a nationwide outcry over police brutality. Eric Garner's last words, "I can't breathe," now a rallying cry for the Black Lives Matter movement. And just this afternoon, Garner's daughter responded.
Commissioner O'Neill, I thank you for doing the right thing. I truly, sincerely thank you for firing the officer. Regardless to however you came up to your decision, you finally made a decision that should have been made 5 years ago. We will be going for the congressional hearings. We will be trying to reopen the case. We will be going after the rest of the officers involved because it's not over. Justice for New York City means Pantaleo is fired and there's no murdering cop on the police force.
Joining the table, Reverend Al Sharpton, president of the National Action Network and host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC, and MSNBC legal analyst Maya Wiley. Jonathan Lemire is still with us as well. We're waiting to hear from Garner's mother, Rev. I'm just, this has obviously been 5 years, and we've been waiting. And the question, I think, for a lot of people, there are a million questions, but the biggest one is this the end of the story, or is this not the end of the story? And if it's not the end of the story, where do things go from here?
No, it's not the end of the story. As his daughter and son said at the press conference at National Action Network with me this morning, there's a commitment made to the mother and I by Congressman Jerry Nadler, head of Judiciary, that he's going to do judicial hearings on why and what happened in terms of the federal investigation. And there is the request, since we have a new DA in Staten Island, to reopen the state case. You must remember that police said that Eric Garner had 10,000 cigarettes. That ended up not being true. There were statements made that were patently untrue. If those statements were made to a grand jury, that's perjury. But even as important as all of that is this was a police policy, no chokeholds. You cannot use chokeholds, and the commissioner cited that today. We want to see that made federal and or state law, not going from one commissioner's tenure to another's. The policy is the policy. It ought to be against the law. And I think that when the commissioner said that if he was a cop, he'd be mad at him for making the decision. If he was a cop, he ought to be glad that the police say we're going to enforce the guidelines that you were trained on. Don't forget, Pantaleo was trained against chokeholds. He decided, whether it was during the action or before, it really doesn't matter, that he was going to do what he knew was against police policy. So are we saying now that police are above the law? Don't worry about policy. Don't worry about your training. If you get angry, you can choke somebody to death. I think that is what this decision today said. No, you can't do that. And police cannot enforce laws if they're not going to follow laws.
Well, same question to you, Maya. I wonder what, at the end, as we come to this, if it's not the end, where do things go? And what do you think at this point, at this moment, whether it's certainly a certain kind of climax, and it's going to bring a certain kind of closure, if not a total one. What are the big lessons that we should take away from the course of how this has all been, not just the controversy itself, but how the controversy has been handled, the fact that it's taken 5 years, and many people see this as too little too late. Just try to take this thing up to 30,000 feet and tell us how to think about this.
Well, 30,000 feet, I absolutely agree with the Reverend that, number one, the commissioner did the right thing in accepting the recommendation from his administrative law judge. He did not have to, and we need to remember he could have rejected that recommendation. The decision was his. By the same token, the decision would have been his to act without that decision as long as there had been an internal investigation and due process for Officer Pantaleo. So the question here becomes, at the 30,000-foot level, how and when is there justice in law if someone loses their life at the hands of an officer who is violating clear policy and training? Because as we keep hearing in the discussion, it is very difficult to bring a criminal prosecution, even in a case where you have a man who, number one, under the discretion of the officer, did not have to be arrested. You know, all this talk about how somehow Eric Garner caused his own death. Lots of questions in the trial about how did the officers have probable cause for him selling loose cigarettes at over 300 feet from where Eric Garner was standing. So even the premise of the arrest should be under question. And that's something we're not talking about. It's unsafe to be a police officer in too many instances, and in too many instances, it's unsafe to be black.
Reverend, the mayor of New York City and also a presidential candidate, if an underdog presidential candidate, Bill de Blasio, didn't really take a stand one way or the other whether this officer should lose his job or not. He deferred to the police commissioner. Do you think he showed appropriate leadership?
I think that by the city charter, he could not interfere. And
you voice your opinion.
But my opinion is that had he interfered, they would then be able to say this was all politics, what they're saying anyway. Would I have liked to seen this dealt with 5 years ago? I was involved day one when the family called me. Yes, I would have. But would have liked to seen this jeopardized? If the mayor had come in, which I wish someone had moved immediately, they would have said it was political, appealed it, and we would have lost the termination fight. So in the immediacy of it, I wish he had moved. In the legal restraints, I think that it protected this decision that was made today. But this decision should have been made by a jury in a courtroom. We have still, when we started this whole movement with Eric Garner and then on to Michael Brown and Ferguson, it was for the law to work, not administrative jobs.
Rev, I'm going to cut you off real quick because I want to hear Eric Garner's mother, who just moments ago addressed Pantaleo directly. Let's take a look.
Pantaleo, your regime, London, y'all can appeal all you want. That's right. But I'm still out here. I'm out here for the long run. Yeah. You come out here against me, I'm out here. That's right. And you cannot scare me away. Right. Yeah, Pantaleo, you may have lost your job, but I lost a son. That's right. July 17, 2014. I lost my son. Yeah. You cannot replace that. You can get another job, maybe at Burger King, okay? So
that's Eric Garner's mother, obviously upset and talking about the possibility of appeal. We've seen the police officers union come out and is unhappy today with this ruling. We're talking about where this goes from here. Is the fact that there's not just larger policy issues here, but this issue seems just with the way the officers union is standing and denouncing this outcome. It does not seem like there's going to be a kind of consensus around this in terms of this resolution.
Well, no, and look, we were never going to get consensus. Unfortunately, with at least the senior leadership of the Police Benevolent Association, the rank and file, remember, and some of them turned their back on Bill de Blasio, Mayor de Blasio, because he said it could have been his son. And that's a conversation we have to be able to have honestly. And one thing I will say, having worked in City Hall and having gotten to know many rank and file police officers, is many of them want to have that conversation. And we shouldn't confuse the PBA spokespeople with necessarily every rank and file New York City police officer. There are a lot of good police officers out there who actually care about creating better relationships.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.